have another at-home recipe for you today. Today we're going to make sticky buns. So it's going to be in 3 different steps. The first thing we're going to do is going to be make the dough. And if you watch the white bread recipe, it's a very similar process. The only difference is that this is an enriched dough, which means it has butter and egg in it. So it's going to take a little bit longer for it to rise because those ingredients kind of weigh on the yeast. So it's going to take a little bit longer. We may need to add a little bit of heat to aid it along in its process. So here we go. We're going to start with the dough. What I have is 1 packet of yeast, or 2 1/4 teaspoons. I have 3 tablespoons of sugar, 3 tablespoons of butter, 1 egg. I have 1 1/4 cups of milk, 3 cups of flour, and a teaspoon of salt. So the first thing we're going to do is, in my little bowl with my yeast, I'm just going to add a little bit of milk to it and a little bit of the sugar. Just maybe half a teaspoon of the sugar and a 1/4 cup of milk. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to let that do its thing. It's going to undergo some chemical reactions. It's going to start to prove and start to get bubbly. So I'm just going to let that sit for 10 minutes. Then we'll come back and we will add all the other ingredients. Okay, so I've had this sitting for about 10 minutes. It started to get bubbly. You probably can't see, but there are bubbles on the top. It's definitely starting to activate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that to my flour. I'm going to scrape down, make sure I get all of it out. I'm going to add the rest of my sugar. I'm going to add the rest of my milk. And salt. And I'm going to give that a good mix. Once that's starting to come together, I'm going to add in my butter, which was softened, 3 tablespoons, and I'm going to add in my egg. All right, we're going to use our hands then, so get ready to get messy. We'll knead all this together, and we're going to knead it in the same way that we did the white bread. So we're looking for a smooth and elastic dough, no clumps, no shagginess. We want it to be stretchy and pull apart for us. It's coming together. I did add a little bit of flour to it. If your dough is super sticky, like sticking to your countertop and you can't work with it, just add a little bit of flour. This dough is wet, but it will come together as you work with it. So don't be afraid. It'll shape itself into a ball eventually. So all I'm going to do is put it back in the bowl and mix it in. And I'm going to set it to the side. And I'm going to let it rise in a warm place this time. So like I said, this is an enriched dough, which means it has sugar, butter, and eggs in it. So I'm going to let it rise in a warm place. That's just going to help it rise a little bit more than if I were to just leave it alone. So it just speeds up the process a little bit. So I'm going to leave it an hour and a half. We're looking for it to fill up the whole bowl. I'll cover it with saran wrap and we'll come back then. So I have about 30 more minutes left on my dough rising. It's been rising for about an hour. We're gonna go for an hour and a half. In the meantime, I can make the syrup that's going to go in the bottom of my pan for my sticky buns. So what I've done is I have greased, can't see it because it's glass, a 9 by 13 inch pan. You can do it with Pam, butter, olive oil, whatever you have there. Grease that. And then in a pot on the stove, you're going to combine a 1/4 cup of butter, a 1/4 cup of corn syrup, and a 1/2 cup of brown sugar. I was actually out of light corn syrup, which is what I would typically use, but I had golden syrup instead, so that's what I put in there. If you have dark corn syrup, that's fine too. We're just going to put this all together in a pot. We're going to mix it, and then we're just going to... Alright, it is all boiled, and now I'm just going to pour it in my pan. We're going to finish up the rise on the dough, and then we'll shape them into the actual cinnamon buns. All right, here they are. So my sticky buns were in the oven for 25 minutes. They just started to color on the top. They've risen really, really well. And I like mine just a little bit gooey, so I'm gonna pull them out right now. They are looking good. So what I did right before I pulled them out of the oven is I lined a baking sheet with aluminum foil. And so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to immediately flip these over onto that. I lined it with aluminum foil so that the goo doesn't go everywhere, or else that is just a mess to clean up. So I need 2 hands for this one. I'm going to flip them out, and I'm just going to leave them there with the pan still on top of them until they cool.